Good morning, everybody. I think it is probably morning for everybody that is online. Very excited today to have Simon with us. It's actually really nice to be able to introduce the expertise of one of our clients. So Simon is the CEO of the Risk Management Institute of Australia, but I also believe, Simon, you're also a board member at one point of RMIA. So I think that gives you that unique perspective of almost being in both positions, which can be risky in itself. As Emma mentioned, risk is a massive topic, and we certainly probably aren't going to cover everything that we would like to cover today. So we're just going to touch on a couple of key things. Dare I say, Simon, that the word risk, I think, in probably, I would say for me, in the last year or so, has become sexy. Now, I know most people don't think of associations as sexy, but we always have some, I guess, hot topics, keywords, and things that associations tend to focus on. And risk seems to be one of those new words. From our perspective, I think it really came to the forefront when COVID hit. I don't like to keep talking about COVID. I keep saying, don't ever mention that word again. But I know as an organisation for us, the first thing that we started to do was, do you have a BCP? Does everybody have a BCP, a business continuity plan? You need to get ahead of risk management. And so the world changed very, very quickly. And I think we all started dabbling in risk. And I think it opened an opportunity then for years to come for people to start looking at risk in a bigger and a better way, and not just about, do you have your little risk management plan of, how much money you're going to lose because your conference just went out the window.
Absolutely. And look, I'm glad that the rest of the world has caught on to risk being sexy. Certainly something that I've been trying to profess for a long time. But look, you're absolutely right. There was a component of COVID making, I wouldn't say necessarily risk management at the forefront, but absolutely decision-making at the forefront. And in many ways, the best way to make an informed decision is being aware of both your risks and your opportunities. Yeah. So what can go wrong versus what are the upside of that? And I know that at the RMIA, which we are an association as well at our core, we do look at, well, what's the risk of not doing it as well. So it's not always going back to those dark old days of the fun police or stopping you from doing something. Risk now covers both that downside, but then also there's the risk of not doing it and the risk of missing out on the opportunity. So there's the positive side to risk management as well. Yeah.
And I think when people think about risk, and I certainly know in lots of conversations that I have with clients, one of the big things people think about is, I understand my financial risk. And then when you say, well, hold on, there's a whole lot of other risks apart from financial risk. And particularly, I think in the modernization of associations, we're seeing a whole lot of risk. We're seeing, member engagement retention risk. We're seeing digital transformation and cybersecurity. We're seeing risk around regulatory and compliance challenges. And so I think it's become more complex, reputational risk, operational resilience. So I was hoping there's a gamut of them, that maybe you could touch on a couple that you think people are either missing or people don't even realize that exist, and just give a couple of key points on some of those.
Absolutely. And look, I think that phrase that you're looking for there is, what are the emerging risks that may be facing or organisations or associations may be facing? And look, absolutely. I think what we've also seen is the bridging of that gap where it used to be, back to your point, it wouldn't happen to associations. Risk management was something that happened to banks or publicly held ASX-listed organisations, but it just takes that one external shock to the environment to make everything very, very real. And with that, there has been a paradigm shift in terms of the expectations of our members, the public and society at hand. So in terms of what either board members, CEOs, or what associations should be thinking about in terms of the future, look, and I think you touched on a few anyway in terms of their real risks today, but they're emerging conversations or decisions that need to be made in the future. And absolutely, cybersecurity is one of those. And that whole concept of it's not if, but when you will be breached as an organization.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. And I guess looking at that, we've obviously had some really big examples recently of, I guess, external cybersecurity threats. So when it's not your fault, versus
absolutely.
internal when it is your fault. And so, the whole Optus Medibank situation, two very different organizations, both external threats. How did they manage their risk? And from my understanding, their sort of risk recovery were very different approaches. And maybe you could touch on what you thought of those approaches and what people could learn from that.
So, and look, again, when we talk about the media jumping on to something, there are a lot of customers that were affected in a very short period of time. And Optus, if I recall, September 2022, roughly that time, I think there were about 10,000 customers that
Yeah.
were directly impacted. Interesting in that it wasn't the first time that Optus had been breached in that way. It was
Mm.
the first time that it had made the mainstream media. And then there was a lot of criticism around their communication and the delays in their messaging and the confusion and what was deemed a lack of concern for the customers. Their customer support back at the time was also lacking a little bit. Their relation with the government, and given the criticality of the services they provide, was very lackluster, to say the least. A month later, when Medibank was breached, again, there were around about 10 million customers that were involved, and this involved their sensitive health records. So again, their communication was more proactive. It was on point, it was transparent, and it focused on the quick notifications and provided regular updates to their customers.
Yeah.
You're then seeing a contrast between the two styles. They were then able to, through that communication, put some preventative measures in place.
Yeah. So I guess so from that perspective, and I guess bringing it back to an association. So, cyber is another one of those hot topics. I won't call it sexy. It is not sexy. It is frightening. And I think, everybody's trying to get their heads across it. And so I guess in that example, the risk profile of those organizations would have been high anyway. So they should have had some risk management strategies already in place to cope with those external threats. And then really it was how they, I guess, reacted to the risk, and communicated. And where they clearly went wrong in one case was they just didn't have their comms strategy on point. What happens when it is actually your association's fault? What about when you really, really sort of stuff up? And, you look at an example, I'm sure everyone's aware of the CrowdStrike issue, where internally they made a mistake. And you can bring it right down to, I've seen associations where the renewals have gone wrong comms have gone out. How do you manage that type of risk?
Again, honesty, transparency, and the piece of advice that I've always given people is just because something has gone wrong, don't stray away from your core values and the values of your organization. Keep them back in mind when you're communicating, when you are talking to your staff and your board, if you're the CEO, or as a board member, if you're then responsible for the PR. So that consistency and approach, don't change what has worked for you to a certain point, and then just continue with that transparency. But the key takeaway, and if you bring it back to the difference between Optus and Medibank in those examples, was the preparation and knowing what to do when something would go wrong. And it brings you also back to that COVID situation where people were scrambling for their business continuity plans, where with a little bit of planning, a little bit of foresight, and a little bit of, well, what will happen when it goes wrong? What will we do as a board, as a CEO? How will I align my limited resources? Because let's face it, associations don't have a huge array of resources. There's a resource scarcity in place. So it's doing what you can with what you have, but doing it proactively, doing it consistently, and more than anything, be honest.
Yeah.
Be transparent and be vulnerable with that as well. I think that members and the general public can smell that, dare I say it, that little bit of BS that might come through. So
Yeah.
it's
So that
absolutely
comes back
critical.
to that reputational risk. And I guess that word consistency, I think, is really, really important, because I know when we're all doing our BCPs, and then I think I asked a couple of people, when's the last time you updated your BCP since COVID? Oh, sorry, I don't do that anymore. And I know we touched on this interesting question where I'm seeing a lot of associations have risk as part of their governance strategy, and that it's a tick box. And yeah, I've got my risk registry, I've got my policies in place. And I know when we spoke, you very categorically said to me, hold on, Nell, risk is not governance, governance is not risk. And so I found that really interesting. And so it'd be great if you would just, I guess, touch on that for everybody that's listening.
So if you've got these sexy words at the moment of governance, compliance, risk, and governance has become that catch-all for everything. If we break it down to what they actually are, compliance is your ACNC reporting. It's whatever you have to do to maintain your charitable license, your social status, your audits, if that may be what's needed, your financial statements. It's your ticket to operate. It's your tick box component. Risk management is looking forward. How do we bring our strategy to life? What do we need to think about? What do we need to plan? How do we execute what we're trying to do? It's forward looking, forward planning. Governance is more around the role of your AGM, company secretary, board meeting minutes, making sure that those invitations are going out, that your board committees may be updated with the latest terms of reference and things like that. So they're all absolutely interconnected, but they
Yeah.
are very, very, very different disciplines with a different mindset.
Okay. So that probably leads me into then, I guess, common pitfalls. So, what are the mistakes, or what are the learnings, or what are associations not doing when it comes to risk? What are we not identifying? What are we not across? What don't we know?
You just look at it with just that past comment, not considering risk management continually.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be overcooked, over-engineered. It's any decision that could be made, thinking about it through the lens of, well, what could go wrong? What has to go right? What do we need to do?
Yeah.
And then being brave enough to say, well, if we don't make a decision, what could we miss out on? So number one would be just not considering risk management. That then flows on to other pitfalls, is reacting and not being proactive. And we can see multiple incidents of that, where we talked about COVID and the business continuity plan. We touched on it with Optus versus Medibank, touched on it that little bit with CrowdStrike, and if a crisis is or something is your fault. So in line with all of that, it's underestimating what would happen. So underestimating or not considering those emerging risks and that changing social expectation. And unfortunately, at the moment, that social expectation is putting more and more pressure on boards and CEOs to get it right consistently. So the
Yeah.
best way to get it right is to not do it in isolation, to be proactive, not reactive, and then to think about what could go wrong and try and have a plan around it.
Yeah, and I guess almost breaking it down as well. You've obviously got your board, and that in itself, your board is a risk, to be honest. If you don't understand your own liabilities or your own responsibilities, and I often see that where directors don't really understand that they actually are responsible for the risk profile of not only themselves, but also their members and also the association, and that they are very much in the public eye. And there was a recent article, I'm not sure if you read it, on Monday in the Fin Review, where the AICD, who everybody thinks is, you know, the big tick box of governance, got taken to task over a board of directors acted a failure to act with stock exchange. Now, I know that's really big picture, but it was, I thought, a very good example of everybody thinking they were doing the right thing because of who they were, but really weren't doing the right thing.
Absolutely. And look, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole of talking about the AICD directly. However, there are some insights and there are some lessons that can come from that article. And it's a really well crafted article. It's ensuring that there is a capability to make decisions and a capability to understand risk management throughout your organization. You're 100% right with what you said, in that it's the board's ultimately responsible for the risk profile of the organization or the association, but it can't all sit with the board. There's a responsibility for the information that comes up to the board to make their decisions through the board reporting, and ensuring that that's accurate, timely, and helping the board discharge their own fiduciary responsibilities in their responsibility as a director. Part of those other lessons that I think, what insights that came out of that article was, again, differentiating between governance, risk, and compliance, and that they are all different but interconnected. And I think that if there's anything where that hasn't become apparent, it is thinking that compliance is risk management.
Right. Yeah.
It's compliance. It's giving you the ability to keep operating. It's your ticket to operate. It's your tick box exercise. But I think as what we're seeing with organizations today, and particularly with that article, is ticking the box isn't enough.
Yeah.
You need to do more.
So when you're doing your strategic plan, I'd be fascinated. So I'm assuming there's this massive section on risk. I would hope, you know, how do you factor that in your strategic plan? Is that a part of it?
Absolutely. So risk for us is central to everything we do. As being the Risk Management Institute of Australasia, we collectively understand that we have to be the pillar of what good risk management looks like for organisations. However, we're very small. I'm resource constrained. The board understand that. So it's a matter of doing it for fit for purpose and what works for us with the size of our organisation. But what we have done within our own strategic plan is, I think, like everybody else, the board has set the vision, they've set the direction that they want me to take the organisation in. In doing that, we've broken down the steps of what we need to do, what has to go right in terms of some of those key dependencies, which then allows myself with the board and also my team to then start to report on that and understand and be looking for those key components of our strategic plan around what needs to go right. Because one of those risks for associations is, and I'm on the receiving end of it, probably less and less now, but with a volunteer board, every board meeting one of the board members would come along with a new idea, something new that they wanted us as an organisation or an association to focus on. It's one of those risks. Is
and
that
I use the word
drift?
strategic. Oh, I was going to say, I heard this new buzzword called strategic drift.
Absolutely.
And that it was this unconsidered risk for associations. And I thought it's brilliant, because we're constantly saying, you know, you need to realign who you are, what you do. But are people talking about that? And the risk of not constantly evaluating that is a huge risk for most associations.
Absolutely. And it can put boards and CEOs in a really tough position, because you need to be seen to be engaging and on board with the direction that we're going in, which absolutely we are, but it then comes down to choices. Yeah. And if something new comes along, then that's great. But we agreed the strategy. If we're going to change that strategy, change that direction, then that's okay. But we can't add to what we're already doing. So we want to do something new, then let's have that conversation to see, well, does it align with what we're aiming for? If yes, great. If no, what are we going to stop doing so that we can do this new thing?
So we're really reframing risk to look at it as an opportunity for association.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But then also being bold enough and being brave enough to say no, but say no in the right way, in the right context, without it sort of coming across
And
as
I guess
negative.
that sort of leads into, I think a lot of people, and I use this word all the time when I'm talking to clients about budgets, we're very risk adverse. We are going to make sure this budget does, there's no risk in it. And so we're then afraid to grow. And I think it's how do you tackle risk versus growth? How do you make sure that you're still growing, but you're not jeopardizing, the financial sustainability of your association?
That's again where the budgets and that finances can come into it. So we look at it internally at the RMIA in two ways. One from the operational sort of management, and is the operation itself making money? Do we have a robust business model, diverse enough revenue streams that what we're doing in our day-to-day is working?
Yeah.
We then will take some of that operational surplus and invest into projects, which may then result in a net loss for the organization, which again sounds incredibly risky in terms of, wow, how am I going to be presenting to my members that we've made a net loss? But if we're investing for growth and that we know that we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul, but we're taking that money or reinvesting that money strategically with a well thought out plan, knowing that it's going to add to and complement our vision and our strategy and allow us to grow, then in our experience, presenting it that way at our AGM gives our members confidence in the board, the executive and management that we are taking carriage of their association in the right way.
Yeah.
So again, we've been brave enough to have a chair, have a board that believes that our business model, our operating model is robust enough to sustain us to have maybe one or two short net losses. As CEO, I've been very hard in saying, well, my performance is then being judged on the operation of the business, not the net position, because the board has then agreed to reinvest. But done in the right way, with the right ROI set, the right, dare I say, check boxes along the way to ensure that we're doing what we said we were doing.
We still need our check boxes. They're very
absolutely
important.
Yeah. Then you can grow. And I think that you can grow in the right way, sustainably, and be bold enough and brave enough to do that.
Fantastic. As I thought, I knew that we would fly through the 20 minutes, and we've got over onto the 25 minutes. So Emma, I'm not sure if there are any questions from everybody that's listening.
Hello, that was amazing, both super thought-provoking. So thank you for sharing all of that. If there are any questions, then do pop them in the chat and we will cover them off. I'll feed them through to Nell and Simon. We did have a couple of pre-submitted questions, I think, Nell, that you could share with Simon, just to give people the opportunity to punch in some questions.
Yeah, sure. I feel we've covered a couple of them, and we sort of tackled there was a question about growth, and one of the specific questions was, we'd like to review our membership pricing, but we're worried how an increase could be perceived by our members. How do you tackle, I guess, the communication back to your members about that?
I'm not sure if that's actually come from one of our board directors. Look, ironically, we just put our prices up on the 1st of July for the first time in 7 years.
Right.
And we approached it in a, as you'd expect with the RMIA, a very methodical approach. It was supported by a very robust communication plan. So we we advised our members when it was going to happen, why it's happened, and then those excess funds that we'll get from that increase, where it will go to, and why we've had to do it as an association. And for us, it was, again, probably the same as most people on the call. Our costs have gone up, and unfortunately, we've just had to pass those on to the members. But given that it was the first time we'd done it in 7 years, when we did that membership fee increase, it was like the membership didn't even notice.
Yeah.
We
Okay.
didn't receive any negative feedback. Our retention rates are the same, and our membership is still growing 2 months after the fact. So I think this comes down to transparency, communication, honesty, and in our experience, you can't go wrong.
Yeah, fantastic.
And we have had a few questions come through, so I'm just going to divert to those if that's all right. So to both of you, how often does a board need to meet to consider risk?
Oh,
interesting question.
Okay, you answer. I'll give my answer. I mean, to me, I think we are looking at a world that is rapidly changing. I sat down at lunch yesterday and somebody said, "Where's your reconciliation plan? Where's this? Where's that?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, I hadn't heard of this bit yet." So for me, it's twice a year in terms of company minimum. So, I would think quarterly for us, but I'd be interested for an association what you would say, Simon.
So we do a lot of these things annually. However, every board, so that's a formal risk review annually. However, risk is on the agenda at every board meeting. And I will submit as part of the pack that goes to the board what's changed within our risk world, internal risk world, since the last board meeting. But a lot of my CEO reporting is also, here's what's happened, here's what's coming up, here's what's keeping me up at night as a CEO, here's what's top of mind for me as well. So there's risk built into everything that goes forward to the board. So the short answer to the question is the board should be considering risk in every board meeting. What degree will vary, and it doesn't always need to be big and formal and somebody externally coming in and running through a workshop. It can just be those decisions and any business case that's being put forward. Is this in line with our strategy? Does this align to our risk appetite? What are the risks that this could introduce?
And so I think people are almost doing it without knowing it. So for example, we as a company have a board meeting every month, and very much every question, every director is responsible for talking about what they perceive as threats or challenges of the past month and the month that's coming up. So I guess you could say that is assessing our risk continually.
We're also at a very fortunate point now as well, where we're starting to look longer term as well. And where do we want to be in 10 years' time? And what do we need to do now to set us up to ensure that we can meet that? That's, again, foresight, planning, and that comes back down to risk management and decision making. So you're right. It's ingrained in every conversation that a board is having. So don't think that you need to do something special around risk. It might just be a matter of calling it out in some of those board packs or maybe some of those papers.
Fantastic. Emma, do we have time for one more question?
Two more questions. Simon, there's probably the second question that's left is actually probably something that you might want to expand on if we were to do more of these. The question for you though is interested in hearing Simon expand on his views on governance versus risk versus strategy development. If you can kind of cram an answer into the next couple of minutes.
Now, okay. So if I actually start to have that conversation, both Nell and Emma will cut me off because we only had a short amount of time here. So look, I'm absolutely happy to expand on that in the future. I'm not sure who asked the question, but I'm happy to have my email shared after this and have that conversation sort of outside of this, but absolutely, think there's a lot there that we could unpack.
Excellent. Thanks, Simon. And actually the third question is, but very similar, talking through a typical risk review process that you'd recommend for board members undertake. I know that we tried to steer clear for this particular session on practical steps. You're keen, I know, to delve into that in more detail and hopefully more follow-up, but
Absolutely, yeah. Because again, that's not a 30-second answer to a question. If you're going to get it right, engage everybody and have tangible outcomes that will add benefit to your organization, dare I say, not just ticking the box, then it's probably worthy of a greater conversation.
And do you think, Simon, that once a year you should get somebody externally to review that risk profile, review that risk strategy?
Interesting question. I'm on the fence with that. And the reason why I'm on the fence, if you go back to my comment in response to that AFR article, where we need to be developing the capability and the competency internally, regardless of your own size, then there could be a degree of, well, if we're not doing it ourselves, then we don't have that expertise. However, not everybody has the ability to facilitate a workshop in that way.
Yeah.
So there can be that need to bring somebody in to just help keep everybody online and on track. Again, well, I think that overall risk review process, as we touched on, could be worthy of another webinar, and we can talk about.
Absolutely.
And we can talk about whether we bring somebody in.
Boards and things like that, doesn't it? About
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
I do appreciate everybody's time, and I don't like going over because I really value that people have taken the time out to listen this morning. So thank you very much, and thank you so much, Simon. I know that we could speak probably all week on this and all month, but we will certainly continue the conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nell. Thanks, Emma, and thank you, everybody.